Welcome to our new podcast, Why Can't They Just?, focusing on Australian politics, policy and getting stuff done. My name is William Sinclair. I'm a uni student. I'm also a member of the Labor Party. I'm also a member of Labor Environmental Action Network. And joining me is Janaline Oh.
Hi, I'm Janaline Oh. I'm a former Australian diplomat and also a member of the Labor Party and the Labor Environment Action Network. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are recording this on the lands of the Ngunnawal people and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and also to other people and families with close connections to this land.
So why are we doing this podcast, Janaline?
So I am keen to do a podcast on why things are more complicated than they look, I guess. I think one of the things that's really struck me in this term of government, particularly in the context of people saying the Labor government is so unambitious, is people, I think, don't realise, firstly, how complicated things are, and secondly, how ambitious the government actually has been. So the Prime Minister has pushed back on this a bit. He's made the point that transforming the entire basis of the energy system from fossil fuels to renewables in 3 years is actually pretty ambitious. I think he and Chris Bowen, the Climate and Energy Minister, have made the point that this is something, this is the biggest change in our energy system since the Industrial Revolution. He's also said making the first steps towards having childcare no longer be considered as a kind of nice add-on, but to have universal early education as a concept of a right that every Australian family should have access to and every Australian child should have access to. He would argue that is also ambitious. I think Tony Burke, the former Workplace Relations Minister, who pushed through some really ambitious industrial relations reforms that have actually seen real wages rise in Australia for the first time in more than a decade, I think they would argue that is also ambitious. So I guess one of the things that I'm keen to kind of unpack a little bit is what is behind the policies and what is behind the slogans and what is the difference between a slogan and a policy.
Sure.
Because we've heard a lot of slogans, we've heard a lot of things that sound very attractive that may not actually have much policy behind them.
And so why did you join Labor, Janaline? Because my understanding is you joined in 2019.
I did. I joined on the night of the 2019 election. And look, I joined Labor because I was concerned about the climate. I was particularly concerned by the lack of policy and the lack of interest of the Morrison government in doing anything after the National Energy Guarantee, which was put forward under the Turnbull government, kind of fell apart and, in fact, lost Malcolm Turnbull his job as Prime Minister. I feel like the coalition government just sort of gave up the ghost on climate action. Yep. They did come kicking and screaming to agree to a target of net zero by 2050, but with really no policy behind it. And this is, again, where I come to sort of the difference between a slogan or a target and an actual policy. So why did I join Labor rather than the Greens, for example, or rather than just getting more involved in an environmental group? Yeah. It's because I was a diplomat for 30 years, right? I was a public service servant, one of those Canberra-based bureaucrats. I think my theory of change was you affect more change by being inside a government, that you can do stuff within a government, within a major party, that you can't from the outside in terms of actual delivery. So I guess that's why I joined Labor. And, what I found when I first joined Labor is that certainly the ACT branch of the Labor Party is full of policy nerds. it is full of public servants and former public servants, retired public servants who love nothing better than to talk about policy and who have an incredible depth of understanding and knowledge and history that really makes policy debates in this branch of the Labor Party pretty interesting.
All right, so we're recording this on the 20th of May. This is 2 to 3 weeks from the stunning election defeat on the part of the coalition. And today the Nationals have now split from the Liberals.
Yeah, crazy.
What do you think?
I think it's like, wow, crazy. I mean, I've got to say, nobody expected 93 and possibly 94 seats for the Labor Party at this election. I mean, right up until the 2nd of May, the day before the election, people were saying, well, Labor might just squeak a majority. Yeah. Interestingly, YouGov did a poll, an exit poll, in a number of marginal seats in the first week of pre-poll. So in the 2 weeks before the election, people can go and vote early. And they found in those marginal seats a 4.5% swing to Labor. And everybody, including me, said, oh, yeah, right, exit polls, that can't possibly be true. It was actually a bit of an understatement in some of those seats. Like, it was actually crazy. So I think people didn't really expect this. I think the Prime Minister and the central leadership of the Labor campaign did expect majority government. I have to say that as we got closer to the election, I was also expecting majority government, but I was thinking maybe 80 seats.
I think for me, I saw the sports bet odds, and the sports bet were offering $10 for every $1 you put on the coalition. Yeah, and I was thinking, I think the Labor's winning. I don't think they're winning that much. Yeah, and boy, was I wrong.
No, everybody was so wrong except the punters, who were so right, as they often are. Yeah. But I think, look, people have analysed the election, people have analysed the campaign, how the Liberals had no policy, how, just the negativity didn't work out for them. Yep. I don't think we need to do that now. I think what I would like to say in terms of my observation is I think, even though I would love to think that this majority means the whole country has embraced Labor values and just wants to have a good Labor government do all the things that it said, I fear that actually what it means is that a lot of people in this country who would actually have preferred a Liberal path, and by Liberal path I mean one less focused on government intervention, one more focused on individual aspiration, one focused on more trust in the markets, which, is not the path that I support, clearly. I joined the Labor Party, but I think those people just didn't have a choice. I think, and this is a thing that worries me a little bit about the size of the majority and also about the state of the Liberal Party in particular and the coalition more broadly now that the Nationals have dumped them effectively. I fear that what this election showed was that the Australian people actually didn't have a choice of alternative governments. And I think there's a difference between opposition and alternative government. So a good opposition will hold a government to account, will potentially offer some constructive alternative solutions, and will potentially work with the government in the national interest to deliver some project, right? I think the very large crossbench can be an effective opposition. The independents, particularly the Teals, people like Helen Haines, Andrew Wilkie, Rebecca Sharkey, who've been there for a long time, have, over the course of their time in Parliament, offered constructive suggestions to governments of both colours. They have worked on specific policy issues, and they have definitely helped to hold governments to account. The media can do a job in holding a government to account. I mean, we can come to the role of the media, which hasn't, in my view, been entirely great.
Yeah.
But
in another episode.
Maybe in another episode. We could probably do a whole episode on my issues with the media.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a difference between that and offering an alternative government. Because when you come to an election, voters need more than just a choice between a government with a policy program and a bunch of people who can hold them to account on that program. I think in a democracy, you really want to have at least two choices of alternative policy programs. And we didn't have that at this election. Because if you don't have this over the long term, you will end up being Japan, right? The LDP in Japan has effectively been in power for 50, 60 years.
Without the opposition party being in.
So the opposition party has been in power for a very brief period during that time.
Sure.
But effectively, at election after election, people just don't really have a choice.
Sure.
And what you end up with, I think, is, a big risk of policy stagnation.
All right. So before we move on, do we want to make any quick notes about the Greens result and why that happened? Because that took me completely by surprise in terms of how badly they did. I was not expecting a Greens result where they lose, Adam Bent loses, and that guy in Queensland, Max Chandler Mather loses. I was not expecting that result at all. What do you think that means?
Yeah, I actually was expecting the Greens to go backwards. I wasn't expecting them to lose the seat of Melbourne. I was expecting them to lose the seat of Ryan, actually, which they held. The reason I wasn't surprised was because on the doors in the ACT, which is a pretty green, part of the world, so Canberra has, since the last election, been a Labor Greens competition rather than a Labor Liberal competition. I found a lot of people quite annoyed with what they saw as shoutiness and obstruction from the Greens. I've heard a number of Greens say, but we took the same, Richard Di Natale, for example, says, we took the same platform to the last election and the one before that. And, in the last election, obviously, we had the Green slide, so it's not that people don't like our program. I don't think it's necessarily that people didn't like their policy ideas. I actually think it was people didn't like their shoutiness, right? They didn't like Max Chandler Mather effectively holding up the Housing Australia Future Fund for 18 months, meaning that social and affordable houses did not get built during that time in order to make a point. And I think a thing that was quite damaging was that article in the Jacobin that he wrote that the Prime Minister quoted at great length in Parliament, which effectively said, I can't remember the exact words, but it basically said, we don't want to pass this because then people will stop being so angry about
It'll demobilise.
It'll demobilise some of our activists.
Yeah.
And I think people did not like that. I think people didn't like the shoutiness over Gaza. I think people, I think a lot of Australians, possibly even most Australians, are horrified and outraged by what is happening in Gaza, right? Some of them blame Hamas, some of them blame, a large number would blame the Israeli government. I would probably err on the side. I think both are responsible, but I think, the actions of Israel have been quite outrageous. Having said that, to draw a bow that says, as Maureen Faruqi did, that Labor is complicit in genocide, I think people found a bit of a stretch. And I think just the constant yelling and the constant divisiveness, and from both the Liberal Party and from the Greens, right? The Liberal Party, just every time anybody said anything vaguely critical of the actions of the Israeli Defence Force in targeting hospitals or killing children, they screamed anti-Semitism. Now, anti-Semitism is a real thing. I think it is terrible that synagogues and Jewish neighbourhoods in Sydney and Melbourne have been targeted with violence and vandalism, but criticising, you know, what are ostensibly war crimes is not anti-Semitic. Anyway, I think we should have a whole episode actually on Israel Gaza. But sure. I think the main issue with that was that for nearly all of the people in Australia who were voting, this was not a voting issue.
No.
Right? I mean, you did some campaigning as well.
Yeah.
What was the number one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 top issue
cost of living.
Was cost of living. It was housing affordability. It was energy bills. It was medical bills. It was childcare. And the difference between Labor and everybody else is that Labor actually had a real program. And I'll tell you what the most powerful thing that I found on the doors was a little flyer that we produced in February, which just had all of the cost of living measures that the government had already taken. And during the campaign, which of course was called in late March, and so throughout April, I would go to the doors and I would say, look, this is a bit out of date because it doesn't include the budget measures and it doesn't include the election commitments, but this is just the stuff that we have already delivered. Yeah. This is the stuff that you don't have to vote for us again to have because you already have it. And people really liked that, right? They really liked the idea that this is an actual thing that we've done. So I think that was also quite a powerful thing. And if you contrast that with the Liberals' complete lack of policy and the backflip on working from home and, you know, beating up on public servants and then taking it back.
I thought that policy was kind of brilliant because you're essentially attacking people that can't go out and defend themselves. They can't sit in front of the press and talk about, actually, I work really hard. You know, I'm working from about 9 o'clock to maybe 6 and then I go home and I have dinner and I log back on and I'm up until midnight. Those people can't go out and defend themselves. So they're kind of, you get a free go.
Yeah, but you know what? An interesting thing. So I reckon in the 1990s, John Howard used to do this a bit, beating up on Canberra public servants. And it worked really well because a lot of people in Australia thought of Canberra public servants as lazy bums, you know, working 7 hours and 21 minutes a day, which used to be the standard public service day, and, you know, clocking off and getting time off in their wallets. Real Australians working hard in real jobs didn't have that luxury. They had to work overtime, sometimes unpaid. They had to, you know, they had to really pull their weight and deliver. And these public servants who couldn't get sacked and only worked 7 hours and 21 minutes a day had a really cushy life. I think the pandemic changed that. And I think it changed it in a very fundamental way where people actually valued government services to a degree that I think they had not before. And I think during the pandemic, people realised who public servants are and the fact that they aren't just a bunch of bureaucrats tapping on computers in air-conditioned offices. They are nurses and they are, you know, teachers, and they are the people who mow your grass in the ACT, and there's just a whole lot of people who are public servants. And I think people actually started to value the services they get from government as opposed to just, you know, thinking of it in a kind of abstract way.
Sure.
Right? And this is why I guess I'm making this podcast, because I really deeply believe in policy. And, you know, this is not a very popular position in a lot of the country.
And on that segue, there's been a lot of talk in the progressive media about why, now that the Liberals and the Nationals are so smashed, they've been splintered, they're their weakest point in living memory, why doesn't the Albanese government just go for broke on serious progressive ambition? All the things that maybe a Greens voter would like, or maybe a very, very progressive person in Canberra or Sydney. Why don't they just go for broke on big, big progressive reforms that they may not have taken to the election?
So I reckon they will go for broke on the reforms they have taken to the election. And I think that includes big progressive reforms like transforming the energy system, right? Like, I do also push back on the idea that the government is not ambitious and has not been ambitious. That said, I would like to see more reform of, say, the taxation system, because I think in Australia, we, contrary to what Peter Dutton would have you believe, or the Liberal Party would have you believe, now that Peter Dutton's left Parliament, not on terms of his own choosing, but they talk about us having an expenditure problem. They talk about Labor, employed these extra 41,000 public servants with the implication that this is a big waste of money and we have an expenditure problem. I don't think we have an expenditure problem. I think we have a revenue problem. And our revenue problem is that we don't collect enough. And to deliver the services that the Australian people have said they like, right? Beefed up Medicare, fully funded public schools.
NDIS.
The NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. All of these things, people like them. People want them. People are not paying for them. So I think and also the other thing about the taxation system is very income heavy, and it's very heavily biased against young people. So here we have in this room the opposite ends of the spectrum of who benefits from the tax system, right? So I'm a retired public servant on a really nice superannuation gig.
Yeah. You
are a uni student who is looking for his first, post-uni job. And you are going to be taxed over your life so much more than I have been, and so much more than I am going to be going forward. Sure. And that is just profoundly unfair.
Sure. And
I think people get that, but I think the danger of the government just saying, oh, well, we've had to think about this and we're going to just completely rejig the tax system, is that people will, the losers will come out and they'll say, but hang on, that's bad for me. And you'll get, various parts of the media will come out and run campaigns against it. So I think, and then you'll lose the political argument. So yes, maybe the Australian people still won't have a proper choice for alternative government, but that's where you start getting people getting really fed up and going to some of the extremists who will say, we have all the answers, we can solve this, you can have the NDIS and not pay tax. I mean, look at Clive Palmer's, policy offering. He was going to reduce taxes and, make Medicare available to everybody. I mean, it was just like, you can have Christmas every day.
Sure.
Right? Santa is here. Yeah. He's called Clive Palmer.
Yeah.
Now, anybody who thinks for 2 seconds is going to say, well, he can't afford that. That's not going to happen. Or frankly, the Greens saying you can have dental in Medicare, you can do this, you can do that, and all you have to do is tax the billionaires. Right? Taxing the billionaires, unfortunately, has not been shown to be terrifically effective in other countries, because billionaires, it turns out, have options. So it sounds fantastic, and it would work if after you implement the policy, everybody's behaviour didn't change. But the whole point of policy is you change people's behaviour. So I think this is another thing about policies versus slogans. Policies take into account the fact that the policy is going to change behaviour. In fact, a well-designed policy will be designed actually to change people's behaviour.
But there are some policies that we're not going to be afraid about admitting that we are pro getting rid of franking credits. We are pro getting rid of the capital gains discount. Why wouldn't the Labor Party, with such a crushing majority, go after those sorts of things?
Well, I think the reason it won't, probably, is because it told the Australian people it wouldn't. And if you think about the last term, right, the one big tax policy that they promised they would not change, but they did change, was the stage 3 tax cut. So for people who can't remember what that was, and I found on the doors that's practically everybody.
Sure.
the stage 3 tax cuts were part of a Morrison government tax reform. So stage 1 and stage 2 were temporary tax relief for lower and middle income.
And this is what they do every time. They announce a policy which hits the poorer middle income people a little bit, and they go, oh, great, fantastic, some cash now. And people obviously very much need that cash. And then they sneak in this thing in the back door, which is a big tax cut for wealthy individuals.
That was going to be permanent.
That was going to be permanent.
And that was going to be delayed for 3 years. So to the other side of the 2022 election. Now, Labor promised it wouldn't touch that. It did touch it. What it did was, because the original policy was it was going to take away a tax bracket and basically give a massive benefit to people earning over 120,000 a year, and a really massive benefit to people earning over 200,000 a year. Labor said, okay, we are going to keep part of the benefit, half the benefit for people earning over 200,000 a year, and with the rest of that money, we're going to distribute it back through the tax system. So we are going to give every taxpayer a tax cut, including the top taxpayers, but they get less than they would have, and everybody else gets something. That was very, people don't remember how contentious that was when the Prime Minister stood up at the press club and said he was going to do this. And he owned it. And I think that was actually a really good demonstration of leadership, right? He owned it. He said, this was my call. I take responsibility. It was a broken promise. But the reason I broke this promise is because when that tax cut passed, interest rates were at, 0.1% or something. We were coming out of we weren't even in the pandemic. We hadn't had a global pandemic. The world was a different place. We are now in a cost of living crisis. We've got inflation, we're starting to get it under control, but I think in 2023, when he announced the stage 3 tax cut changes, inflation was still at around 5%. People are really hurting. So that's why I'm redistributing this. So sorry to people earning over 200,000. But
the real losers in the cost of living crisis.
Half of your tax benefit is now going to go to everybody else. And if you talk to people on the doors, as I did in April 2025, most of them didn't even remember that happened. It has become so uncontroversial. Yeah. So I think they would potentially do something like that, but they would have to have a very good reason. But I think more likely, and I really hope this happens, and I will probably do what I can through the internal party processes to make it happen, I really hope they will start to open a conversation on some of these bigger tax reform ideas and then take it to the next election and hopefully win a mandate for them at the next election so that they can then implement them in good conscience.
The last thing I want to talk about is the leadership changes to Larissa Waters from Adam Bandt. And do you want to talk about the Liberal leader as well? Yeah, so before we get on to that, I didn't finish my analysis of what happened to the Greens, right? So, and look, I really want to push back on this narrative that the Greens and a lot of the sort of Greens-friendly media have been putting out, that the reason the Greens lost those seats was actually because the Liberal Party collapsed and their preferences went to Labor. Adam Bandt was talking about blue Labor seats, as in Labor members who had been elected on Liberal and One Nation preferences ahead of the Greens, completely ignoring the fact that he got in 2010 by literally giving flyers to people saying, if you're a Liberal voter, put me second to get rid of Labor. That's how our preferential system works. That's just, people will vote for someone and they'll put a second preference, the person that they find less offensive than the person that they put as third, fourth or fifth preference, right? So, but this argument that, the Greens lost these seats or failed to win other seats because the Liberals collapsed, I've actually had a look at some of the numbers because, I said I was a policy
nerd.
Okay, yep.
So in the seat of Brisbane, the Labor primary vote went up by 4.9 percentage points.
So this is whose seat is this?
This was Stephen Bates's seat
Okay.
in Brisbane, which was won by Madonna Jarrett of the Labor Party.
Yep.
The Greens vote went backwards by 1.4%, so arguably not that much.
This is the primary vote.
This is the primary vote. And when I say 1.4%, it's like 1.4% percentage points. So,
yep.
You know, the Greens got something like, I don't know, 22 or 23, whereas previously they had got 24 or 25.
Yep.
Right? So this is percentage of the whole electorate.
Yep.
The Liberal vote went back by 3.5%.
Yep.
So, on the face of it, on those numbers, you would say, yeah, the Greens narrative is right. The Liberal vote collapsed. Labor got their preferences, except the Liberals got the highest number of primaries. Why is this important? Because the two candidates with the highest primary vote will not have their preferences distributed, right? So the Liberal preferences in Brisbane were never distributed because the Liberals were one of the top two candidates.
Right.
So you cannot say that Labor got voted in on Liberal preferences. Labor got voted in because their primary went up by nearly 6 percentage points, which is a lot.
Yep.
The Greens went down and Labor got other preferences. So let's look at the seat of Melbourne, Adam Bandt's seat that nobody expected.
And this is, my understanding is the person who ran in that seat got 50 T-shirts from Labor HQ or something like that?
I don't think she even got any, actually. I think what I heard, and look, I don't know. I don't know her and I don't know the details of her campaign, but I heard media reports that said she actually had to fundraise to print her own T-shirts and cornflakes, and she actually had to organise her own branch members and friends to go and volunteer for her, because why would Labor's central campaign put resources into a seat that they never thought they were going to win? So, you know, given that Labor didn't even campaign in that, Adam Bandt got the largest number of primary votes, but he went backwards by 5.2 percentage points.
That's fairly crushing for...
Which is pretty crushing for a safe seat.
Sure.
And a member who's been there for 15 years, right? Labor got 5.7 percentage point increase in primary. The Liberals went backwards by 0.2%.
So they stayed steady.
So they were pretty much flatlined. So what happened in Melbourne was basically the Greens went down and Labor went up. Like, there's, you know, and Labor didn't even really put a lot of effort into that seat. So I think you would have to conclude that Adam Bandt lost the seat of Melbourne rather than Labor winning it. So Labor did put a lot of resources into Griffith and Brisbane. It didn't put a lot of resources into Melbourne. If you look at some of the others, you know, Canberra, McNamara, Richmond and Wills were all seats that the Greens targeted. In all of those, except for Wills, the Labor candidate primary went up. Where it really did make a difference, the Liberals' collapse, was in the seat of Bean in the ACT. So Dave Smith nearly lost that seat to an independent called Jessie Price, right? So she did very well. She went up by, she got a 26 percentage point percent primary, which is very good for a first time independent. Dave Smith's primary went back by 0.7%, so he went back slightly, but the Liberals went back by 6.7%, and that was enough to take them into third place,
where they can redistribute their votes.
And so their preferences did count in Bean, and everybody, there were only 4 candidates in Bean, and the Greens and the Liberals both preferenced Jesse Price.
Right.
So that is how Labor nearly lost that seat. It was because the Liberals actually collapsed. And they collapsed in a way that actually, like, you could not make this up. They had failed to notice that the electoral map redistribution had affected the seat of Bean. So in 6 of the polling booths on polling day that were in the seat of Bean, they were handing out how to vote cards for the seat of Canberra. Like, genuinely.
Which seems like it has a corollary to the Libs failing to get the forms in on time for the AEC to actually register to be candidates for the council elections. It seems to be a hallmark of Liberal dysfunction.
In Sydney, right? The New South Wales division of the Liberal Party failed to put in about 100 candidate nominations, and so they didn't stand.
Yeah.
And so a whole bunch of young Labor candidates who were kind of, stocking filler candidates who didn't, who were just sort of names on the list.
Yeah.
Because we always put up candidates.
Because you never know when the other side might forget to enrol.
Because you never know when the other side might forget to nominate. But going back to our original issue about the problem of this stonking majority, the problem for me is that level of dysfunction and that level of just, I don't know, like unseriousness
in the Liberal
Party just doesn't, to me, speak well of Australian. I mean, I think it is actually bad for democracy. I think it's actually bad for the Labor Party as well.
If they have such an unserious competitor.
Because, again, unless you have a credible alternative government and people actually have a choice, it's like going to be quite hard to, it's like, okay, I will put in a pitch for Labor Party policy processes. I think this is actually an important feature of what happened at this election. The Labor Party had a set of really good policies. Now, part of that was because they'd been in government. But having said that, the Morrison government was in for 3 years and only did one thing, which was the tax reform.
Oh, they did AUKUS as well.
They did do AUKUS, but, I mean, basically their policy offering was pretty thin, right, in that 3-year period. Why did Labor have so many policies? Partly 9 years in the wilderness, but also, as you know, Labor has a very rigorous policy-making process within the party. They have every election cycle, they have a national conference. Leading up to the national conference for about 10 months, they have a thing called the National Policy Forum. The platform, which is available on the ALP website, the ALP
PDF.
National...
Anyone can download the platform?
Anyone can download the ALP National Platform. But the National Policy Forum will basically take the previous platform, relevant ministers or shadow ministers will look through their bits and make suggestions, and any rank and file member of the Labor Party has the right to submit policy ideas and proposals for changes to the platform. The unions engage very enthusiastically in this process. The Labor Environment Action Network engages very enthusiastically in this process, which is why I am very familiar with it. But it is actually kind of interesting to me, and I was quite surprised that in the last national conference, which was when we were in government, so this is in 2023, during that National Policy Forum process, like random rank and file members that I knew who had put in policy proposals were getting calls from ministers' offices because each minister's office will nominate a staff member who's responsible for coordinating the National Policy Forum. And they would actually talk through their policy ideas.
And then returning to our comments on Susan Ley and Larissa Waters, do you have any thoughts about that?
Look, I'm very reluctant to make personal comments about people that I don't know. I would say I really hope that Larissa Waters means what she says when she says that the job of the Greens in this term, with sole balance of power in the Senate, is to work with Labor to get shit done. I think that is really, really important because, the Greens can play a really good role in pushing Labor ambition. But fundamentally, the people who said before the election, and there were many of them, that, in order to get real progressive reform, we have to have a Labor minority government with a progressive crossbench in the balance of power. A progressive crossbench cannot get Labor to pass policies that Labor doesn't think is a good idea, right? And this is, again, comes to my theory of change. Why am I in the Labor Party? Because if I can get Labor to think a thing is a good idea, then the government will put that forward, right? If Labor is in government.
Sure.
Whereas if Labor doesn't think it's a good idea, then you can have the crossbench scream for it as much as you want, and it still won't happen because governments set the agenda and governments will put forward policies. So the other thing about minority government is that they are very time consuming. And so governments that are in minority will pare back their priorities to absolute, do or die priorities. It will be a much smaller list of things than they can do with a comfortable majority.
Because their sort of parliamentary runway is much shorter. Only a few number of their bills are going to have a realistic chance of taking off.
Exactly.
Then if they've got a super majority, for example, with John Howard winning both houses, he had a huge runway, and a lot of bills were able to take off quite easily.
No, exactly. And he implemented a lot of reforms. And sometimes it produces overreach, which is what we talked about before, about, why doesn't Labor just do a whole lot of stuff that it wants to do?
Right.
Because John Howard in 2004 massively overreached on industrial relations and lost his seat.
In terms of overreach, we're sort of thinking about John Howard in 2004 overreaching, or after he wins his 2004 election, and then Tony Abbott in 2013, where Tony Abbott won 93 seats, is that right?
I think it was 90.
90, okay.
And then he produced a budget, 6 months later that essentially reneged on all of the things that he promised he wouldn't cut effectively.
So there was a big thing, no cuts to education, no cuts to health,
no cuts to the ABC, no cuts to SBS, and then he produced a budget that did all of those things.
Yeah.
And people didn't like it.
Yeah.
And he got rolled by his own party.
Yeah.
So I think, these are cautionary tales. I don't think Albanese is dumb enough to do that because he lived through all of that, right? He had a front bench. He was manager of government business. Right.
Front row seat.
He had a front row seat to all of that, and he is not a dummy. I don't think anybody after this last election is ever going to question his political capabilities ever again, actually.
Yeah.
But that's why I don't think he will actually do it, because I think he's too smart. But I do hope they will have more ambition, right? I really do. And maybe we can talk about some of these other things in future episodes.
So I think we're gonna wrap it up here. We're very keen to talk about the EPA, so the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPBC, and kind of go through a timeline as to what's up with that, what's happened in the past, what's happening now.
Yeah.
Depending on how things develop in the next couple of months. We also want to talk about AUKUS. Obviously, we want to leverage the fact that Janaline's been a diplomat in China, and we want to talk about the China relationship, and we want to talk about why you left DFAT, maybe going into that a bit more.
Yeah.
And we want to talk about
climate change.
Climate change, absolutely.
And climate policy, and the difference between climate policy and a climate slogan.
Yeah. And we're very keen to try and hash everything out, and we want it to be long-form, deep dives into all of those issues, and we're very keen to make sure this thing works. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.